this next time it came at me, it bit at my leg, and I pulled my leg out of the way, and it snapped shut right next to it. And then it reached up with its paw, and it swiped me across the face. That's when I started to realize that there's just nothing physically that I can do. I was probably about to die.
Welcome to Big Red Canoe, the podcast from Friends of the Boundary Waters Wilderness, where we introduce you to captivating people and intriguing stories from America's treasured wilderness. I'm Dave Meier. Grab a paddle and hop on in. Today we're going to talk about bear safety with Alex Messenger, who is a Duluth, Minnesota author and photographer, and he was recently named to Duluth News Tribune's 20 Under 40 list. Alex survived a grizzly bear attack at age 17, and he lived to tell about it. And then he wrote a memoir called The 29th Day, and this year's the 20th anniversary of that attack. Alex is a communications specialist at UMD and a volunteer as a member of the St. Louis County Rescue Squad. So we'll talk about your experience, Alex, and also the Boundary Waters, black bears, food storage, and hanging food while you're out camping in the backcountry. So thanks again for joining us, Alex. And how's the summer started for you?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Dave. Summer's starting well. It's near the end of June now, and I feel like we've had a very mild start to the summer. So looking forward to getting out a lot more as time goes on.
You haven't gotten out in the woods yet?
I haven't gotten out for any backcountry like overnights. I've done a fair number of day trips and stuff, state parks around Duluth. So I've got some blocks of time set aside for the next couple of weeks. So that'll be kind of when we're getting out into the backcountry a bit more.
When I talked to you recently, you were actually on an assignment with the rescue squad. There have been some fires.
Yeah, we had some kind of historic fire activity here north of town in Brimson and the surrounding areas. So I was on a medical standby with the rescue squad. Luckily, that day was a very boring day, which is what you want on a medical standby. But we were staged in case any of the fire crews, got injured or ran into trouble, so we could head in there with our specialized equipment and get them out as quickly as possible.
Is that connected at all to your experience? Can you trace it back to that?
Yeah, that's definitely a part of like what inspired me to pursue that work. I'd say there's kind of two facets to it. So one is that, I had this experience and I kind of, saw how things can go wrong and then how you need to respond to that. So I learned some skills along the way that I wanted to, perhaps apply and help other people when they're in a similar situation. I'd say the other half of that was inspiration from my grandfather, who was on a volunteer fire department for over 50 years in Ohio. And so I grew up hearing his stories, listening to his pager go off in the house and was kind of inspired by his dedication and sense of service through that. And so I kind of combined those two into my own personal desire to pursue search and rescue.
What was your background in camping and going in the outdoors when you were younger?
Yeah, I mean, when I was really young, my parents were both adventurous folks. After a while, they decided that they wanted to go to the Boundary Waters. They had never been to the Boundary Waters previously, so their first trip was with, a couple little kids. And they, asked folks who had been there before for their recommendations, borrowed some gear, and brought us into the Boundary Waters. I think I must have been somewhere between like 5 and 7 when we first went, maybe a little older, but still, less than 10, which is a challenge, anytime you're bringing a kid, but especially the younger they get. And that was just like this amazing expansion of what, was possible. I mean, backcountry versus front country camping is, there's a lot of similarities, but there's a lot of differences in terms of preparation and gear and stuff like that. And we just fell in love. We loved being out in this amazing wilderness where, you aren't hearing cars and you aren't tempted to go back to the gas station or whatever, and you're kind of figuring things out. And so that was something that we, turned into a yearly tradition. We kept going back year after year. And then after a while, my parents decided to sign me up for a wilderness camp with YMCA Camp Minojan. It's a Y camp. They do wilderness trip based camps. And so they signed me up for this 8-day session, which was that first kind of gateway into that experience. And, what I'd felt when we went as a family was like that times 100 when I went with, my peers and with guides and just learning from people who knew the skills and knew how to do it efficiently. Just really kind of solidified that love of backcountry travel in me and really got me hooked to keep going back after that. So that kind of segued into, you know, progressing up to that longest trip that Minojan offers.
In all that experience, had you encountered wildlife on any of your prior trips in Minnesota and in southern Canada?
We'd seen, moose and bear and other critters and things, but we hadn't had any negative experiences, no negative encounters.
What were some of the differences between some of what you'd experienced in those wilderness and then this Canadian tundra trip that you were on?
There's a lot of similarities, but there's certainly some differences like you're mentioning. I mean, we're still, paddling in canoes, and so all those skills and all that practice that we'd put into our trips in the Boundary Waters and surrounding area, like 100% applied. And I feel like that was a huge part of like traveling successfully up there. There were a couple big differences for me. One was just like how remote it is. Like we weren't expecting to see anyone else the entire time that we were out there for 42 days. For this trip, it started out by driving to the end of the road in Canada, like the farthest northern point of this area, and then getting into a float plane and flying for a couple hours into the Northwest Territories. And then they drop you off, you get all your stuff out, and you say goodbye. And then the plane leaves, and you're all alone right off the bat.
Are the boats on there then?
Our boats actually went inside the plane. We flew in a Twin Otter, which is a two-prop plane with a relatively large fuselage. But our Old Town trippers, we had to like disassemble so they could nest together, and then they took up half the plane, and then the rest of us sat in chairs next to it. So very tight, but we could fit everything inside the plane. The other thing that was really different was the scale of the place in the Boundary Waters. I mean, it's huge. It's huge. It's a huge wilderness area. But when you go into the tundra in a place where there aren't trees, or the taiga where they're really short, and then we gradually made our way to the tundra, the sense of scale is just like on a whole nother level. Like you can see so far. There isn't really this like sense of scale that you can measure things by. You're on a Boundary Waters lake, you can see the far shoreline, you see the trees there, and you have a good sense of kind of what that distance is. But it's totally abstracted when you're that far north. And so that took a while to get used to. I don't know if I ever got used to it.
Well, that comes through in your book. I mean, I
Awesome.
think you paint a really good picture, and just like thinking about the wide spaces and kind of like some of the terrain, it sounded like was just completely different, and the scale was completely different. What about the precautions around wildlife? Did it feel different? Like the stakes were any higher?
I definitely had this sense of gravity of like, okay, it's us now. It's up to us. We've got these couple options for if something happens. But in terms of like preparation and like awareness, we were aware that we were going to be in grizzly country. We weren't going to enter grizzly country until a little ways into the trip. So we started out in the Northwest Territories, paddled down Dubont River, and then when we crossed into Nunavut province is when we were going to enter grizzly country, basically at Dubont.
I see.
Obviously, it's like, it's not there isn't a fence that says where they start and where they finish. But, that was Grizzly Range. Camp had been operating around the southern end of Hudson Bay. So we were kind of in the northwest corner of Hudson Bay, inland from there. But they had been operating around Hudson Bay previously, and that is polar bear country. And they had, polar bear precautions when they were traveling in that area. And they actually decided to switch to this area because of some kind of close calls that they had. in that previous area. And polar bears are they're known to like stalk people and follow them for a prolonged period of time, which is like another level of creepy. And so that's like a risk that they decided to avoid that risk and move to this other area, which had grizzlies instead of polar bears. Um, so that kind of perspective came into our trip. We brought a various number of things to deal with an encounter if we had one. We had bear spray with us. We had bear poppers. Bear spray is basically like a little fire extinguisher that shoots mace 40 feet. And it's to interrupt a bear that's like charging at you or really close to you and get it to go away. Bear poppers are just loud, like fireworks essentially to scare them away.
What was the training like before this? And you'll have to tell me later how that factored into when you
Yeah.
had to use it.
Yeah, so we had a fair amount of training when we were at camp. We were trained on how to use the bear spray. We were trained on how to use the bear poppers, all those things. Ideally, we wouldn't use those things. We'd be avoiding an encounter in the first place. We talked about, not only how you use those tools, but how you respond if you see a grizzly bear. Speaking, like if it's close, like speaking calmly to it, not running away because it's going to kick in their chase instinct, avoiding eye contact, basically like giving ground to the bear. And if you're with a group of people, it can change a little bit, but in general, like avoid them. We're up in the taiga and the tundra, so you can see them from really far away in most cases. And so being aware of them, setting up our camp properly so that our food storage, our food preparation, and our sleeping spaces are all insulated and separate, so that they're not attracted to us. If they do come by, they're gonna go for that food instead of the people.
Did you have it? What was it, in a pile, or did you have it hung, or
up there? I mean, there isn't really a good way to hang it. So we had barrels, and then everything was like sealed inside that. But yeah, it was all like in one spot. And then 100 yards away.
I just talked to my cousin. He was just over in Montana rafting, and they have kind of electric fences
Sure.
that they'll kind of put up, just a small, compact, folds down to the size of a camping table, but they can put everything in a pile, and it just deters the bears who might get close and give them a little scare.
Yeah,
I think is all it is.
And I mean, that's probably a really dense grizzly country, and that's prudent practice. Where we were, there are very, very few grizzly bears. Like we were told we'd be lucky if we saw a grizzly bear. So we were not expecting. Yeah. So we ended up being very lucky, and I ended up being especially lucky.
Oh, man.
Yeah. There are very few grizzly bears. They have a super broad home range, so each one kind of wanders really far. It's not like the coastal grizzlies where they sit and they gorge on salmon. These ones have a huge home range where they're scavenging and going around and looking for their food and such. And so we're not expecting to see any. We had this training in the off chance that we did. Like we said, we ended up being very lucky.
So then what was your mindset like the day of the attack? What were your priorities for the trip? What were you kind of thinking about? And then how did it come about, and how did that all change?
Yeah, so the day the attack happened was day 29. Well, this adventure that we've been working towards for years, that we've been preparing for months, was kind of coming to a close. And we're kind of feeling like things were maybe going to be, easy from here on out. And just kind of feeling that bit of, I guess, I don't know if loss is the right word, but I feel like anytime you're coming to the end of a trip like that, there's this sense of like, okay, this is about to end and I have to go back to my normal life, and that magic is about to maybe wear out or something.
Mm.
And so I kind of was coming into that day with that sense. Day 29 was a layover day. So we were camped on this island in the middle of this enormous lake that's like 25 miles wide. The island was about 5 miles wide. So like that scale is just huge. North of the tree line. So it was a layover day, and basically, we weren't traveling. We were just going from meal to meal. And gorging on food. And partway through the day, the rest of the group decided to go up this ridge behind our camp and explore what was on top of it. And I was really tired and decided that I was going to take a nap and I was going to meet them up there. And I ended up oversleeping and woke up with just this like sudden sense that I was late, that I needed to get out of the tent, that I needed to climb up this ridge. I don't know if it was this feeling that like everyone was already going to come back and I was going to miss my chance or what it was, but I just was compelled to get out and get up there as quick as I could. I started climbing the ridge and talked to Dan partway up, and just kind of chatted about what was up there and what to expect. And then I continued off on my own. Everyone was back at camp at this point, and it took about 10 minutes to climb up this ridge. Just really steep, scree grass, like kind of crumbly. And then at the top was just this expanse of open kind of lunar landscape, rolling granite domes. And I was just kind of walking along there in that headspace of, what am I going to do with this time that I have left on this trip and in this amazing wilderness area? What am I going to do right now? What am I going to do beyond that? And so I was kind of daydreaming about those things and thinking about maybe I take my camera out and take pictures, and maybe I go to this Inukshuk, this cairn that Dan had told me about. And I didn't realize that as I was walking along, just kind of thinking my own, thoughts, that this 600-pound barren ground grizzly bear was walking up the other side of one of these domes, and we were headed straight for each other.
What were the first indications that something wasn't right?
So as I walked up one of these domes, I was just kind of like looking at the ground, and out of the corner of my eye at the top of my peripheral vision, I just saw this like flash of brown fur come up over the rise, and my head snapped up, and instantly my body was just like preparing for something. I didn't really know what. And a moment later, I saw this form expand, and I thought that it was at first musk oxen. They're these big ornery animals that we'd seen on our trip that we knew not to get too close to because they can charge at random. And so that was like the first scenario that went through my mind, and it was a bad one. But as that momentum carried me and whatever this animal was closer together, the form of this grizzly bear appeared, and we just walked right into each other's field of vision, 30 feet apart. And I just recognized immediately that this was a grizzly bear and that this was the worst case scenario. I'm 30 feet away from it, way too close. We've surprised each other. And I flashed back to that training. I thought of Dan in my head saying, "Hey, bear, whoa, bear, it's okay, bear." I thought of the bear spray. I imagined pulling it out of the holster, taking the safety off, aiming it, pressing the lever, and shooting that 40-foot cone of spray in front of me. And I couldn't do that because the bear spray was in the tent. We had assumed we'd be surprised by a bear when we were sleeping. Like I said, the views are so expansive. And so it wasn't our practice to carry it with us on our person all the time. And so I didn't have it with me.
I could see that. Yeah, you think maybe something's going to happen in camp. You're going to have to scare something away.
Right.
Yeah. And then you'll have time to act and maybe act together as a group or something.
Right. The idea of being alone and having this happen in that scenario just was a gap in the planning. So I didn't have the bear spray, and I thought back to that other algorithm, what we were supposed to do, and saying, "Hey, bear, whoa, bear, it's okay, bear." All I wanted to do at this point was to turn around and run away, and I knew that was the only thing that I could not do. Bears can run at close to 40 miles an hour. I could run at like 17 miles an hour. That would have been a terrible choice. And so I just had to like stand my ground, back away slowly, try to speak calmly to the bear. It said, "Hey, bear, whoa, bear, it's okay, bear." And it did not understand me. And it launched onto its paws for a stationary bluff charge, just like, "Ugh, ugh." And I kept backing away slowly, trying to calm down the situation. as the bear faded from stationary bluff charges to a full speed charge. And I faded from hey bear, whoa bear to yelling obscenities and help and
Oh man.
just trying not to run as this thing is barreling towards me.
So then what's your next thought? You don't want to run. So, sometimes experts talk about playing dead. Did you try to do that?
Playing dead was not something that I considered. It hadn't really been part of our training. It's a valid thing to do. Basically, you're saying to the bear, like, I'm not a threat. So I didn't play dead at this point yet. But I went through that algorithm of what we've been told, and as it was charging at me, when it was like 15 feet away from me, I didn't really know what to do at that point. So I was just yelling, trying to get the attention of the other guys back at camp. But they had no idea that anything was happening. The wind was going in the wrong direction. And when it was 5 or 10 feet from me, I had my Pelican case, just this like 15-pound brick of camera, and just totally on instinct. Like, I was not making a lot of these choices at this point. My body was just reacting. But totally on instinct, my hand went back and I threw the case underhand, and it tumbled toward the bear, and it hit the bear square in the nose with enough force to turn its head all the way to the side. And with a thump, the case just went flying over its shoulder, and it couldn't see where I was. And I was able to jump out of the way and dodge it on that first pass, which was not part of our training.
So that actually kind of deterred the bear briefly.
Right.
When I worked in Montana one summer at Glacier National Park, and there was always the threat of grizzlies around, and so there was a bear attack about a mile up the path right from Swift Current Motor Inn where I was working, and it was an older couple, a woman and a man, and she ended up fending off the grizzly. The grizzly attacked her husband. And then she ended up fending off the attack by taking her binoculars and whacking the bear on the nose with the binoculars. And I just remember the front page of the Hungry Horse News the next day. The man's in the hospital bed going like, I got mauled by a bear. And the woman is sitting on the edge of the bed with this pair of binoculars, like grinning at the camera. So luckily he was out of harm's way by that point. But I mean, that's not hit them on the nose and kind of, deter them a little. If you have the presence of mind to do that, I think it was a good move.
It gave me that little moment where I was able to just jump out of the way. I don't know what it would have happened exactly if it had been able to make contact that first time. I don't think it would have gone well. As it happened, I jumped out of the way and it just barreled right through where I had been a moment before. And as soon as it realized it missed me, it turned around and came at me again. And so it kept coming at me, and I kept like bullfighting it, jumping out of the way at that last moment. And each time we got closer and closer, and I didn't have binoculars to swing at.
Something with a strap, maybe.
Right, some leverage. I'd thrown my club, and it was already deployed. So we just got closer and closer. I didn't know, what more to do other than to try not to be in contact with this apex predator. But it was just trying, so hard to get closer to me. And each time it would swipe at me with its claws, and it would bite at me with its teeth. And so I had claw marks down the back of my jacket and my arm and stuff. And the last time it came at me, or this next time it came at me, it bit at my leg, and I pulled my leg out of the way, and it snapped shut right next to it. And then it reached up with its paw, and it swiped me across the face, which is just a huge amount of force. And my head whipped to the side, and I went flying to the side. And that's when I started to realize that, like, I was probably about to die. And there's just nothing physically that I can do against this grizzly bear, this 150-pound 17-year-old kid against this like 600-pound king of the forest up there, king of the tundra.
Scary.
So as I'm flying midair, it grabbed me with that same arm that it had hit me with, threw me down to the ground, and it had its head right at the top of my leg, and it wrapped its jaws around my thigh and clamped down. And people are like, so the adrenaline rush take care of the pain? It did not. I felt its teeth go in both sides of my thigh, and then I blacked out. And yeah, I thought that was it. I thought that was the end.
How long do you think you were out?
I don't know. I don't think I was out for very long. Um, so far we've had about 30 seconds with this bear. Just a lifetime in slow motion, and I don't know how long I was out, but I played dead very effectively when I was unconscious. So I eventually got to playing dead. And so as I was laying on the ground, presumably not moving, the bear kind of recognized that this was a threat, and the threat was eliminated, and it could leave. So the next instant, I remember I kind of couldn't figure out where I was, and then I gradually got my bearings, and I tracked along the horizon, and I saw that the bear was still there. And so I played dead until it was back over the ridge, because it was walking away, but it was looking over its shoulders at me the whole time it was going, to make sure that I didn't get back up and didn't get back in the fight. So I played dead, waited for it to go back over the ridge, and then had to figure out what to do next.
What injuries did you sustain like in that first go round, and then how did you get away from the bear?
Well, I played dead until it was gone, and waited until it had gone far enough that if I stood up, it wouldn't be able to see me over the crest of that ridge. And I didn't really know what my injuries were at this point. I knew that something was really wrong with my leg. I knew that like my face felt like it had been split open, and I had like this kind of burning sensation from a lot of the places where like the claws had gotten me and stuff. But I had this incredible adrenaline rush at this point, and it was masking a lot of things and making me able to do a lot of stuff that I wouldn't be able to do pretty soon. And so I was like aware of that too. I knew that I had this very short time window, whether it was from adrenaline or blood loss or whatever. I just knew I had to move quickly, and I had to do it as quietly as possible, because I didn't want the bear to be alerted that anything was that I was up. And so I checked my leg with my hand, and I looked at it, and it wasn't covered in blood, but it was all wet. It was covered in bear saliva, all gooey. And so that was good that it wasn't already covered in blood yet. But I knew it was really injured. I grabbed my a book that had fallen out of my pocket, my camera case, and I started running back to camp as quickly as I could with my injuries. And that was 200 yards away as the crow flies, and the last 50 were 100 vertical feet down. That was the ridge that had taken me about 10 minutes to climb up. And the whole time I'm trying to be as quiet as possible, and I'm hoping that I'm actually going in the right direction, because, I was disoriented. There's a good chance, there's no path. There's a good chance that I was going in the wrong direction. But I got to the top of the ridge that I'd climbed up, and I saw the tent, and I saw the guys, and I was able to like yell to them and get their attention and get them to start helping me. But when Dan started doing the full assessment, I had scrapes and bruises all over. I had the tips of a couple of toes were sliced off from something, I'm not sure. They ended up growing back just fine.
Oh, really?
Yeah, just the soft tissue. And then the biggest injury was at the top of my leg where that bite had happened. One of the canines pushed in all the way a quarter inch from my femoral artery, which would have been fatal if it had hit that. That was a bad puncture wound, and right next to it and kind of around it were compression wounds from that same tooth, and then I had compression wounds from the other teeth kind of wrapping around my leg. So somehow it didn't like go through all the skin. It just like destroyed all the tissue. And grizzly bears he could easily like just sever my leg right there with the bite. So I was incredibly lucky, but very injured, very close to much worse injuries. But we were able to stabilize everything and kind of stop the bleeding and get it to the point where we were able to like take a breath and think about what to do next.
And the bear didn't come back looking for seconds?
No, and that was one of the concerns, was that the bear would come back, either to do something else with me, or to come back to the campsite or whatever. Potentially it was smelling the cooking that was happening there or something. But yeah, we were constantly worried, and I was terrified that it was going to come back. So we had lots of vigilance around camp. We had a watch set up to make sure that, if it did come back, we had as early a warning as possible, and we stuck really tightly together as a group at that point. It really changes things when you're in the woods and something like that happens.
Yeah. So you're incredibly far from professional medical help. Um, what do you do next?
Yeah. We had a satellite phone. And so that was, part of our emergency equipment. And that allowed us to actually converse. A lot of like the beacons, and especially the older ones at that time, this was 2005, they had like an "I need help" button, and that's it. And so it was very
Right.
intentional that we, brought something that allowed us to have two-way communication. So took a little bit to connect with camp, but eventually we were able to connect with them, talk through what happened, and the resources we had, the resources that were available. And basically a helicopter, which is the go-to, was not available. And so like the next option, were really upping the ante with like these high risk rescues. And the context was that like the year prior, there had been a rescue along those lines that had been attempted on one of the mountains out west, and like the helicopter had crashed and stuff like that. And so the concept of a high risk rescue is not, it's not a misnomer. There is risk involved with that. So given the fact that I was stable, and the equipment that we had and the communication that we had, the next best thing was for us to make our way closer to Baker Lake, which is this town at the end of our 600-mile route, and at this point about 100 miles away.
So not Baker Lake in the Boundary Waters.
No, not Baker Lake in the Boundary Waters. Yeah. Yeah, they're very different lakes. I've been to both. They're both awesome. But yeah, Baker Lake in Nunavut is this town of like a couple thousand people. It's this Inuit village. It's off the northwest corner of Hudson Bay, and Chesterfield Inlet leads into it from the bay there. And they get like 2 ships a year that service the town. Otherwise, everything's via, air, essentially. And so it's very remote. There's not a whole lot of people. There's not a ton of resources. They don't have a whole stock of helicopters just waiting. Most of the ones that are there for like mining and things like that. So, but that was our definitive medical care, was the medical center there, and then the ability to transport somewhere else. So we had a bunch of different things we were thinking about, like, rabies, the risk of rabies, everything from that to infection to, post-traumatic stress disorder. Like everyone that was kind of managing the situation had these various anticipated problems that we were working with, and like time frames around them too. So we had like 10 days, I think it was, to get my first of the post-exposure rabies treatment. And that was like a non-negotiable. So it's like, all right, well, we'll make our way and change things as we need to, as things change, as things evolve.
So you chose to paddle.
Yep. Yeah. So we were able to paddle. I was able to paddle, I should say. And that was really helpful for me, just like being able to contribute to this effort. So we left the next morning. We were able to paddle for a couple of days before we got stuck in a big rainstorm, which is, again, super rare up there. Water level rose a foot overnight. We ended up losing one of our canoes with our food. We ended up finding our food later. But it would be about a week between the bear attack and when I was able to get evacuated via helicopter. And that was as, the wound started showing signs of infection, and we started treating it, and it started not responding to that treatment. And so, as these things evolve, that algorithm changed, and that's when that switch had to get flipped. And it was no longer a time to continue paddling. And all the preparation and setting up the different resources, at that point, a lesser risk helicopter rescue was in place and ready to go.
Do you remember the helicopter ride? I mean, were you
Yeah,
totally engaged?
I was totally with it. Well, I was quite with it, I should say. Obviously the stress and everything, took its toll, but I remember the helicopter ride very vividly. I remember, the decision to call it in and kind of what that meant. And the helicopter ride was very surreal. I was expecting like some medical, Coast Guard kind of thing, and a crew, and it was like a dude in Carhartts, and he's like, "Hey, yeah, you can sit in the front seat." And so, there was that aspect to it, but then also like we had been under our own power for so long, and then just like as this group, and then all of a sudden I was up in the air with one other guy from our group, Mike, who went with me, and there was the rest of our group just on the ground, and we were waving goodbye, and they were getting ready to paddle the rest of the way out. It's very surreal.
One of the things about that I found really interesting in the book is that, the medical experts were saying, that it might be best for your PTSD or for your mental well-being to avoid PTSD to kind of stay with the group. And it almost sounded like a more gradual transition would be preferred if you could
Right.
make it out and kind of treat and manage the wound. And then you almost sounded disappointed when you had to call in the helicopter. Can you describe how that played out? And do you feel that approach helped you?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it did help me. If you think about it from the perspective of like you've experienced a trauma, which is something that's like outside of your regular scope of things to understand. This kind of like unimaginable thing happened and you're processing it. And if you think about like who is going to be most like situated to understand what you've gone through. And so your support network of the group that was there is like a really strong set of folks for that. And so, being able to not only like be with them, but also be in a place where it happened, where I'm able to create new experiences and new memories that aren't just like, this terrible experience, allowed me to, you know, reset in that way, I guess, while we were still out there. It was really challenging, of course, but I think that helped me to have that more gradual transition. It still took a lot of time to process it afterwards as well. And I think, that that's just a long process.
Mm-hmm.
But, I appreciated that they thought about that at that stage. Obviously, there's, these very acute things you have to think about, but, that's a long-term anticipated problem. And I don't think it was as much part of the like forefront at that time. We'd been in the Middle East, after 9/11 for about 4 years at that point. And so they were starting to get more research and more information about, modern medicine, and like these traumas. And so the research was starting to come out, but it was still relatively fresh. And I think it's more part of the conversation now. And I think that's a good thing because the more awareness there is, the more likely people are able to deal with it and to, put resources into dealing with it. So I think that was kind of a little bit at the forefront for it to be part of that conversation then. And I really appreciate that it was.
How much time passed before you wrote about the encounter then, and was there therapeutic value in that process?
Yeah, there was a lot of therapeutic value in that process. In terms of writing, I've been keeping a journal throughout the trip. And
I'd wondered
uh,
about
that,
that.
and then I finally had this like epiphany of that, aha moment, for, why did this happen to me? What I realized is that I could spend my entire life waiting to figure out what that purpose was and never actually have that like clarity. And I could end up not writing about this experience and not sharing it with people
Mhm.
in this more like intentional form. And that's when I realized that I didn't have to. I didn't have to have it like tied up with a bow. I didn't have to understand that aspect of this experience in order to have it be impactful and meaningful for other people. I could just share my experience and I could share what had happened, and other folks can take from it, whatever it is that they take from it. There's a lot of different ways you can look at this experience. And I don't need to dictate that to people.
Yeah.
And so that was
Just
my
write
aha
it.
moment. Yeah, just write
Yeah.
it. And so at that point, I had this like intention and I had the raw material. And so I really focused on writing this down in a form that other people could consume. And that took about 3 years. And the last step of writing it was to write about the bear attack in the level of detail that was required to turn it into a book. And in a lot of ways, the process of going to that mental space, returning to that experience and writing it down was the most cathartic because I had been putting it off. I knew it was going to be painful and challenging. And so when I finally came to it, I was very intentional about going back into the mental space to, recall those things. Very challenging. It resurfaced like nightmares and stuff for a little while. But after that point, I didn't have to go back there that way. And I understood it better. And the last step of this entire process of publishing the book was to record the audiobook, which I did a couple months before the book came out in November of 2019. So rewind a couple months. I had the opportunity to narrate the book, which is really cool. I did try out, but I got the part to do the narration, and I sat down and I went from start to finish the entire book in 3 days in this studio, just kind of reliving everything. And when I finished with that, I felt like I could just take that whole experience and set it on the shelf, and I could just leave it there, or I could reference it if I wanted to, but it wasn't something that was undone at that point. I was able to kind of set it aside, and move on to the next chapter of my life.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Well, I have one other question about that process. Did you talk to other members of your group then? Were you able to reconnect, and was there kind of a community catharsis as well, as you were writing the book, to kind of, triangulate some of your journal notes and some of your memories with others?
Yeah, there was definitely an aspect to that. It was less like coinciding with when the book was published, although I did reach out to everybody from the group to make sure that they were okay with me using their names and things. But prior to that, just in my own sort of processing, I did interviews with a number of the guys from the trip. I did interviews with some of the administrative folks from camp, just kind of talked through, what things were like from their perspective. And, that was very helpful for me to learn just more about all the stuff that happened.
I just had read Carrie Griffith's book about the July 4th, 99 blowdown, and I had been in the Boundary Waters when the blowdown happened.
Yeah.
And I had a little bit of a similar experience reading that book when I was kind of like, well, I was there. I know what happened. I don't need to look into it anymore. But it was actually really interesting to hear about like what the experience was of the rescue pilots and what it was like for people at the camps, the Y camps, and then the people, who were injured, of course, which are kind of the main focus of that book, but just kind of what was everybody else's experience of that. And I found that really interesting and kind of broadened my picture of that experience.
Yeah, I mean, some of that was intentional and some of it was more just kind of process based. So like it's been 20 years since the attack happened. So in the previous, in the 15 years after when I was working on the book and getting ready for it to be published, I went through all these different life stages. I finished high school. I went to college. I ended up working at Minogen for a number of years. So I'd gone through a bunch of the same trainings that Dan had gone through. Like I got my wilderness first responder, which covered a lot of like the medical side of things and really that algorithm that he followed. And, I just had all of these different life experiences that I did not have as a 17-year-old, which provided a huge amount of context for writing the book. I think I don't know if my path, was adjusted in order for me to better understand this experience, but it definitely had that effect, because of all those trainings, and learning about that in, the real world, and sometimes, out of the classroom, but like actually in the field, talking helicopters down for landing zones and things like that. I felt like I had a much better understanding of, the broader context of what had happened to me back when I was a teenager.
With over 1,200 lakes and hundreds of miles of trails, it's no wonder that people spend a lifetime exploring the Boundary Waters. With so many possibilities, it can be daunting to figure out where to go. Whether you seek adventure, solitude, or want to reconnect with others, Friends of the Boundary Waters has extensive online resources to help you get the most out of your Boundary Waters experience. Visit www.friends-bwca.org/explore for more information.
Solo camping, it wasn't something that I'd really done before my bear attack or since it's not something that I didn't come back to, but it's probably the hardest thing for me to do is to be solo. I love going on solo day trips and such, but there's a lot of like anxiety that happens when I try to do an overnight or something. I haven't like committed to it, and that's probably part of the challenge is like, if it's too easy to back out, then it's easy to back out. And so, but that's, my attack happened when I was alone, and I definitely feel much more of a sense of security when I'm with other people. So we'll see if that changes down the line. I think it'd be cool to do some solo trips, but
backing up, I mean, what's it been like to go into the Boundary Waters where there are bears? There's a difference between the black bear and the grizzlies. But
right.
How have you approached that, and how has that been?
Yeah, I mean, it's been challenging. I'd say it was very challenging at first. And so I assembled like, various pieces that I could bring with me to make me feel more comfortable. Like I always traveled with bear spray right at first. Like the first time we went to the Boundary Waters, I think I wore a tactical vest and a machete and bear spray and all kinds of stuff like security blankets. And I always made sure that I was with, a certain number of people. But as time's gone on, I've been able to dial that back to a more reasonable thing. So I just have these various practices that I always put into place. When you're in the Boundary Waters, like food storage, and cooking separated from tents and things like that. Like those practices are always super important, and making sure that you're overnight, putting it in the proper bear hang or whatever system that you use, and that's regulated, is critical. Grizzly country, same thing. We went to Glacier a few years ago, and that was like really hard for me personally, but I just, figured out what steps can we take and can we put into practice every time, so that we know that we're doing as best as we can, and are decreasing the likelihood of like surprising a bear in the first place.
Yeah. Being proactive, in grizzly country, especially, I've solo hiked and camped, in grizzly country, and I couldn't, I've never remembered so many song lyrics as I was like hiking by myself and just singing like entire album sides.
Right.
Just making sure the bears knew that I was coming. I mean, you can get bear bells and things like that. Although when I worked out there, we used to call those dinner bells. And with the bear spray, the pepper spray, I heard one guy behind the counter call it seasoning for
Right.
the bears. Which is sorry, Alex. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Well, but you may not know this, but I had a bear encounter in the Boundary Waters. I was going to say I was attacked by a bear. I wasn't attacked by a bear, but the bear did take our food.
Oh, geez.
Yeah, we were up on Polly Lake and went up, and the rangers had warned us. There are smart bears in the area, and
Sure.
we ended up hanging our stuff over kind of a log that was, a tree that was kind of fallen, and it was almost like perfect. It was almost too perfect, because it just was able to support this giant pack that we had and was able to just put that right up there. But I don't know if the bears climbed up the log and jumped down on the thing, or if they got to the rope and pulled that down. I mean, smart bear is a smart bear. And I mean, I know there's some places in the country where they can peel, cars apart and things like Yosemite, where they can kind of get to your food wherever it is. And
Right.
these bears were able to get to our food. And so we woke up the next morning and found all of our fat and sugary food was gone. So we had nuts, we had some cheese,
Yeah.
we had pancake syrup, and it was all gone. So all those things that a bear would crave if you're out in the
Right.
wilderness, you're kind of
Right.
fattening up in the summer and getting
Yep.
prepared for winter, and fat and sugar. So then we're sitting there looking at this pack, and like right next to the pack, the bear had taken a crap right next to the pack. A little exclamation
Thank you.
point, a little gotcha from
Didn't
the
need to do
bear.
that, but all right.
And so they got to us, and so we're sitting there without any food left really to speak
Right.
of, and deciding like we have a few days left in this trip, and we ended up catching some walleye, and took the pancake batter. We didn't have the syrup, we had the batter, and we were able to
Yeah.
stretch some rice dishes a little bit further. And then we
Get
didn't have any.
creative.
We're getting really creative. We didn't have any butter left because the bear
Yep.
ate the butter.
Sure.
Fat, and so we just had to like boil the fish and put
Yeah.
salt on it. It was not
Fish.
tasty. It wasn't. Everything tastes better in the Boundary Waters except boiled fish. I just did not taste very good. But it was interesting to see what the bears ate. I feel bad. A fed bear is a dead bear, they say.
Right.
So I feel like we have a responsibility to ourselves to stay safe, and
Right.
also to the bears to keep them safe. So
Right.
I feel like that's important. And so the Forest Service last year put into effect, they had been making recommendations, and then
Yeah.
now they've made it obligatory that people have to hang their food or have it
Yeah.
in bear-proof containers.
Sure.
And so 12 feet up, 6 feet over from the tree,
Yep.
and then 4 feet down, I think is the guideline. What's your approach to food storage and things like that when you're in the Boundary Waters?
Yeah. Well, I mean, a lot of times I'm shooting for kind of that regulation bear hang. I kind of enjoy the challenge of the rigging aspect. And when you have a group of people and you can get it up there and just kind of heave on it, that's one thing. But then you really have to get creative when there's fewer people and you still have to get it going. So, I've always brought, a stout rope for that. And then lately I've been bringing some hardware, like some carabiners to use just for like change of direction or to use like a pulley.
You
That
can
was
pull it
something.
out from the tree too, if you have
Right.
like an extra rope or something.
Exactly. And so figuring out that kind of system and doing your best, but then combining it with, reducing the scent and reducing their ability to get to the food if they get to it, which is what the regulation is going for, That's kind of what I've put into practice myself. So, I know it's probably, I don't know, frustrating for people to have that be like a requirement, but I would guess that that will decrease the number of times that bears end up getting food. And, I'm sure you weren't the first people to have a problem with that bear at your site. And I'm
Right.
sure you weren't the last because they habituate to that. And that's, what we all want to avoid is like them seeing people as a food source and coming to camp to raid it instead. They've got their own system that they should be following. So
Yeah,
it's just part of the whole leave no trace kind of ethos. It extends to that aspect of things too. So,
exactly. Exactly. I what I heard from talking to some rangers that it seemed like there were just a few really problem ones that had really become habituated, and so they had to kind of really lay down the law to I think both raise awareness.
yeah,
They got people's attention by saying,
right.
there'd be a fine, whether it's
Yeah.
5,000 or just $50, still, that they
Right.
would be maybe potentially ticketing people for this, and that it was a
Right.
regulation, not just a suggestion.
Yep.
And being clear about that. And, but I read, at the end of the year last year, that there were fewer than 10 encounters
Oh,
reported versus like the 40 or 50 they would have during the previous years. So whether
yeah,
it's the methodology of the way that people were hanging it and storing their food, or whether it was just raising the awareness level,
right.
it seemed to be working so far.
Yeah, that's
Um,
great. That's definitely going in the right direction.
for me, it's just always just been a part of the trip. It's being bear aware, being leave no trace,
Yeah,
and to actually kind of make sure and understand that you're sharing the wilderness with a potential predator, at least something that could cause problems for
right.
you, like it did for us. And
Yeah,
just kind of then it's an opportunity to do something different. We don't hang our
right.
food around the house, so it's something that's part of this wilderness experience. So my kids actually love it.
Yeah,
They love to be part of the bear hang. My son Finn, who's 12, he's always kind of just like, yeah, can we go? Can we go
yeah.
hang the
Let's
food
get
now?
oh,
And
throw things. I get to pull on stuff.
Yep. So Finn, we're going up in a couple weeks, and I'm gonna make a bear hang video and put it on
Oh,
Friends of the
nice.
Boundary Waters YouTube, and just kind of go over. I've got kind of a couple of key things that just make it just that much easier. Or this little
Yep,
throw bag here.
sure.
I don't know if it's 12 ounces or 16 ounces, but you can
Yep,
get this up over a limb on the first or second try. I mean, it's just
yep,
kind of like it's a sharpshooter versus kind of a
right,
rock or a log, stick or
right.
whatever you
Or
find
water
to
bottle
like
that you
whip it.
never see again.
Water bottle that you never see again, or that
Yep,
breaks, or a
yep,
rock that hits you in the eye,
yeah,
so even though it's extra weight, I find this to be worth it. I think you can get these empty too and just stuff them with sand and rocks.
sure.
And then,
Does that just have
and
a
then
guideline on it then?
a friend of the Boundary Waters, Tiger Bowden, helped me kind of put this together, or he put it together, and it's got kind of arborist rope, which is a little bit thinner and slippery, and just kind of you
Yep,
can work with it a little bit. And
sure.
then there's a carabiner, so you throw that over. I'm not a carabiner, sorry, a pulley. You
Fully,
throw
yeah,
this over the limb, and then you put the rope through there, and then with an extra carabiner, you can actually get a mechanical lift.
sure.
So you actually could get a blue barrel up in the
Right.
air on that thing. And for me last year, it really came in handy on, there have been some place, I mentioned the blowdown, and after the blowdown happened, there have been fires and things like that
Yeah,
that happen in the Boundary Waters, as you know. And so we were up on Isabella Lake, and that had burned. That
yep.
had been part of fire, and there were just kind of some trees without limbs. But you can
Okay,
take something like this and kind of throw it over just even a notch in the
right.
tree, and then use another rope like we were talking about to pull it
Yep,
away from that single standing
yeah,
tree without any limbs. Because I used to just be, throw something over a tree limb. You just got to find a tree
right.
limb, and there's not
Yeah.
always a tree
No,
limb. And so it's nice to be able to have something, you can that's a little more elaborate to just kind of pull it away from a tree,
right.
and then you're usually all right.
Yeah, I almost always have like two directions. There's the one where it's like the main weight, and then that one that's doing a pendulum move, pulling it across. And you can get it like in the middle of a huge span, um, with some practice, and you end up wanting to take a picture of it.
You get the sunset in the background.
Yeah,
It's beautiful, Alex. It's
exactly.
beautiful.
It's quintessential.
Yeah. But even if, for people that are going up through outfitters or anything, outfitters have certain rope systems that they can
Right,
rent to people, Sawbill, Spirit of the Wilderness, those folks I've talked to, and they've got things that they send out with people. Some
right,
use a clothesline method
sure.
to get the rope across, and then you hang the pack over that.
I think you bring up a really good point, which is that like even if you don't have experience with it or someone in your group, there are resources that can help you figure out which method to use or how to improve it or just how to do it in general, whether it's an outfitter or, your permit issuing station folks, like they should be able to help you out.
What advice would you give to somebody who's going up to the Boundary Waters, either for the first time or as a seasoned wilderness traveler that's done this before, but maybe might not be taking it seriously enough? What would you say to somebody?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think there's a couple things I would say. First of all is like think about things beforehand and prepare. You mentioned just like raising awareness potentially being a factor to, decreasing the number of those incidents. I think that's a huge thing. I think you don't know what you don't know. And so when people are aware, that there are bears out there, but all the other things that, go into a wilderness trip, like increasing your awareness and preparation prior to going out there, I think is a really big thing. But then the other thing that I recommend to folks is to talk to those people who are local prior to going in. I think there's a lot of knowledge and experience and just like on the ground reporting that folks are getting at the outfitters, at the permit issuing stations. You can ask them about, are there problem bears in the area that I'm going to that I should be aware of, and there's a good chance that they will have heard, yes or no. And that's the kind of stuff that you can't really get anywhere else. I mean, these days there's more with like forums and stuff online, but I still think there's a lot of value in talking to someone who is, an authority or an expert or a resource, who's there before you go out. So yeah, I think, combining those and being prepared just can help you have a much more positive experience. Hopefully you're going to avoid a negative encounter with the bear in the first place, but hopefully you're just able to, relax and enjoy this incredible place that much more, knowing that you're doing as much as you can. The only other thing I would add is not topical to what we're covering today, and that's to wear your life jacket. On the rescue squad, we do a lot of response to all kinds of situations, and everything is just a lot safer when you wear your life jacket. A lot of people like to think they'll grab it if something goes wrong, but typically, things go so fast it's hard to do that. So wear it and just make that be part of your practice when you get into the boat, and then it's just a thing that you always do. It's like clicking your seatbelt.
I totally agree. So Alex, you were able to then take your survival memoir and put it on the shelf. And then now you're working on a new book. And so can you tell us a little bit about what that writing process has been like?
Well, my new book is coming out in March of 2026 from Blackstone Publishing. That's going to be my debut novel. So the 29th Day was my debut memoir, nonfiction, talking about my personal experiences. And then The Ice on the Lake, which is the working title of the forthcoming novel, is fiction. And so this one was really inspired by my work with the rescue squad. A number of years ago, there was a call where a group of ice fishermen broke away, like the ice broke away from shore on Lake Superior, and there were like 25 folks who ended up getting ferried back to land. And I wasn't able to respond to that because I was working, but I went down to Leif Erikson Park on lunch break while this rescue was playing out, super cold. I think it was January day, and our airboat was on its way back, kind of making sure that no one got missed. And it was traveling back to the lift bridge, and it turned and it went and it picked up the last person who was on the ice solo, walking their way to Wisconsin, where the ice was still attached or still like touching land. And I thought to myself, what would happen if no one knew that person was out there? So it was like a really compelling narrative to me. So The Ice on the Lake follows that premise. It's about this older man who is estranged from his family. He's had some recent terminal diagnoses and trying to reconnect with folks, but ends up going out on the lake, and he goes adrift ice fishing, and no one knows that he's out there. And so this very like reflective experience of him surviving in this very inhospitable winter environment on Lake Superior, kind of going through processing his own life, and how he ended up in this spot. And so it's kind of a cross between Old Man and the Sea and Castaway, set in the wintry north. So it's a really fun survival story, and it's been really fun to be able to explore someone going through an experience like that. It's not me. I don't have to go through that.
Well, thank you, Alex, again for joining us, and good luck with the new book. I'm really excited to read it when it comes out.
Thanks so much, Dave. It's been awesome chatting with you today. And again, thanks for everything that you do with the Friends of the Boundary Waters.
And thank you, everyone, for listening. If you enjoyed the show, please share it with a friend and leave us a rating wherever you get your podcasts. We'll be covering a wide range of recreational topics this season, and we'll meet some great personalities from the BWCA along the way, so be sure to subscribe so you don't miss a thing. And to become a member and support the Friends, visit friends-bwca.org. Big Red Canoe is a presentation of Friends of the Boundary Waters Wilderness. Original music by Surge and the Swell. I'm Dave Meier, and we'll see you next time on Big Red Canoe.